In the fading light of autumn, off the coast of a small Greek island, a storm was gathering strength. The year was 1900, and the Mediterranean Sea churned with the kind of violent energy that made sailors hold their breath and pray to gods whose names had been forgotten for centuries. A crew of sponge divers, men whose livelihood depended on descending into the dark blue depths, their lungs burning as they collected the soft treasures that grew on the seafloor, had taken shelter near the island of Antikythera, waiting for the waters to calm. They were simple men, skilled in reading the moods of the ocean, accustomed to the particular terror and beauty of the underwater world. And in that moment of waiting, of stillness before the storm, one of them would stumble upon something that would reshape our understanding of the ancient world entirely. Picture the scene: a small wooden vessel bobbing on the uncertain waters, the sky overhead darkening as the storm approached. The divers would have been anxious, watching the horizon with the keen awareness of those who make their living from the sea. Some would have been checking their equipment, the simple diving suits of that era, heavy canvas and rubber, weighted with lead belts that pulled them down into the depths. Others might have been smoking or resting or thinking of their families waiting in port. The island of Antikythera rose from the water nearby, rocky and sparse, offering little shelter but enough to keep them from the worst of the open sea. The wind carried the smell of salt and the promise of violence, but the divers had weathered storms before. They knew how to wait. They knew how to be still. The captain's name was Dimitrios Kondos, a man of the sea who had spent his life navigating the treacherous waters around the Greek islands. He was experienced and careful, the kind of captain who understood the price of recklessness in such dangerous work. He led a crew of perhaps a dozen divers, men whose names have mostly been lost to time now, though their action on that day would echo through centuries and reshape the understanding of human civilization itself. As the storm passed, and the waters quieted enough to work as the waves settled into something more manageable, and the light began to return to the seafloor far below, one of the divers, a young man named Elias Stadiatis, prepared himself for a descent. Picture him there on that historic morning, taking deep breaths, steadying himself against the rocking of the wooden boat, feeling the cold Mediterranean air on his sun-darkened skin. The morning light was pale and uncertain, filtered through clouds that the storm had left behind. He checked his diving suit carefully, the weighted belt around his waist, the valves on his helmet, every connection that would allow him to breathe underwater in that strange, hostile environment. The other men watched in silence. This was their livelihood, their daily dance with danger. Elias moved with the deliberate calm of a man who had done this many times before, even as his body tensed in anticipation of what was to come. And then he slipped into the water, disappearing beneath the surface as his companions watched from above, tethered to him by the thin cord that would signal distress, that would summon him back to safety and light. What Elias discovered in those dark waters below would haunt him with a peculiar kind of terror. As he explored the seafloor, moving through the clouded water with the deliberate care of someone working at the limit of human endurance, his eyes adjusting to the strange, muted light that filtered down from the distant surface, he came across objects that should not have been there, shapes that emerged from the murk like ghosts, bronze and marble figures, frozen in eternal poses, their surfaces covered in the soft sediment of 2,000 years, encrusted with the slow accretion of the seafloor. To Elias, in that moment of weightlessness and darkness, suspended in an alien realm where the normal rules of the world seemed suspended, they appeared to be dead people, human forms preserved in some eerie underwater cemetery, perhaps victims of the disaster that had sent the ship down. The panic that seized him was immediate and overwhelming. His mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. This was not the normal detritus of the seafloor. Fishing nets, broken pottery, the scattered remains of commerce and disaster that divers expected to find. These were human-like shapes, arranged in that terrible way. His hands fumbled with his equipment as fear flooded through him, and his lungs, that ancient biological clock that measures underwater time in the most primitive way, began to scream for air. The pressure was building in his chest, that desperate need for oxygen that would not be denied. He kicked upward with powerful strokes, his weighted belt pulling him in two directions at once, and he drove himself toward the light that seemed impossibly distant above. When he broke through the water's surface into the sudden brightness and noise of the boat, the shock of air, the change in pressure, the return to the normal world, all of it hit him at once. He gasped out his discovery with the breathless fear of someone who has glimpsed something incomprehensible, something that violated all his understanding of the world and what should and should not exist in the depths. What Elias had actually found was not a grave at all, but a shipwreck, a luxury vessel that had sunk more than 2 millennia earlier, carrying precious cargo from the distant corners of the ancient world. The crew moved quickly, understanding immediately the significance of the find, recognizing that they had stumbled upon something that would make their names remembered, though ironically most of them would be forgotten. They began the careful, dangerous work of recovering the treasures from the wreck. Bronze statues depicting gods and athletes in poses of eternal grace, marble figures of exquisite craftsmanship that spoke to the refined aesthetics of the ancient world, amphorae and pottery vessels that had once contained wine and oil and grain, coins from distant cities like Pergamon and Ephesus, bearing the images of rulers whose empires had long since crumbled, glass objects so delicate they seemed miraculous. How had they survived 2,000 years and the violence of shipwreck? Each item spoke eloquently of a world of tremendous sophistication and wealth, of trade routes that connected the Mediterranean in intricate networks of commerce and culture. The ship itself told a story of commerce and connection. What had it been carrying, and to where? Was it travelling toward Rome, toward Egypt, toward the great trading centres of the Mediterranean? The very existence of such a vessel, laden with artistic and commercial treasures, spoke to the complexity and connectivity of the ancient world, a world far more cosmopolitan and advanced than many in later centuries would assume. The work of recovery was slow and painstaking, conducted in dives that lasted only minutes. The human body simply could not sustain the pressure and the exertion for longer, in intervals carefully spaced to allow the men to recover their strength and their courage. Each diver descended multiple times during a day, each time facing the danger anew, each time knowing that something could go wrong that would not be survivable. The lines connecting the divers to the surface were their lifelines in every sense. But they persisted, these brave and largely nameless men, driven by the knowledge that they had discovered something extraordinary, something that would bring glory to their captain and possibly reward to themselves. They worked steadily, bringing up artifact after artifact, each one carefully noted and preserved, each one a messenger from a vanished world. Among the objects recovered was a lump of corroded material, bronze mixed with wood, encrusted with the accumulated debris of centuries underwater. It was not attractive, not obviously precious. It did not gleam like the bronze statues. It did not glow with the elegance of marble or glass. Most of the archaeologists and museum officials who examined the early inventory of recovered items paid it little attention. It was lumpy, crude-looking, damaged by its long immersion in salt water. It seemed unremarkable compared to the beautiful statues and intact pottery vessels, the kinds of things that museums displayed, that visitors came to see, that filled catalogues and sparked the imagination. Think of this moment. Imagine the archaeologists sorting through the treasures, carefully recording each item, making decisions about which pieces deserved prominence, which could be stored away. The lump of corroded bronze and wood would have seemed like the remnant of something mundane, perhaps a piece of ship's fittings, perhaps part of some utilitarian object whose original purpose had long since become irrelevant. In the hierarchy of archaeological finds it would have ranked low, and so this extraordinary object, this messenger from the past containing one of history's most remarkable technologies, sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, waiting in darkness, unnoticed and unappreciated. Months passed in that quiet waiting. The great statues took their place in the galleries where visitors could admire them. The coins were catalogued and studied, the pottery was analysed for clues about trade and dating, and the lump remained, patient, waiting. Then, at some point during that quiet waiting, perhaps while being moved or cleaned, while being handled by someone curious about its structure or composition, the lump cracked open, and inside, as if it had been waiting for this moment for 2,000 years, something extraordinary was revealed. Gears, bronze gears, wheels of precise interlocking mechanical complexity. As the bronze corroded material broke apart, gears became visible. Many gears. Tiny, intricate gears made of bronze, interlocking with one another in a pattern of mechanical precision that should have been impossible in the ancient world. There were teeth cut into the gears with remarkable accuracy, some no thicker than a single millimetre, cut with a precision that would have required extraordinary skill and tools. The gears meshed together in a configuration that suggested calculation, that suggested purpose and design of a sophistication that seemed to belong not to the ancient world, but to centuries later. Modern machines of the Middle Ages and Renaissance possessed gears, yes, but nothing quite like this. Nothing with such density, such complexity, such evident understanding of differential mechanics. The shock of this discovery rippled through the academic world like a stone cast into still water, spreading outward in ever-widening circles of disbelief and wonder. How could this be? Ancient peoples were not supposed to have possessed this kind of mechanical knowledge. They were not supposed to have built devices of such complexity. The very existence of the gears contradicted everything that the scholarly world believed about the capabilities of ancient civilizations. It suggested that somewhere in the ancient Mediterranean, someone had understood mathematics and mechanics at a level that seemed almost impossible to reconcile with what was known about the period. It meant that knowledge had been lost. It meant that something had been forgotten. And it suggested that humanity's understanding of its own past was incomplete, perhaps fundamentally flawed. A Greek archaeologist named Valerios Stais, examining the artifact carefully with growing wonder and bewilderment, proposed something extraordinary. This was an astronomical calculator, a device designed to predict the positions of celestial bodies, perhaps even to forecast eclipses, not through mystical means or lucky guessing, but through precise mechanical calculation. He suggested this in 1902, just a few years after the discovery, and he was met with skepticism, with dismissal, with a particular kind of academic ridicule reserved for ideas that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of human knowledge and technological development. How could an ancient device do such things? The mathematics required would be advanced, would require knowledge of trigonometry and sophisticated astronomical observation. The mechanical engineering would need to be sophisticated beyond what anyone believed the ancients were capable of. The gears would need to work in concert, turning in ratios that reflected the actual motions of the heavens. And so Stace's theory was rejected by most of his contemporaries, dismissed as speculation, as wishful thinking, as an overestimation of ancient capabilities. The mechanism, this remarkable artifact that had survived 2,000 years at the bottom of the sea, that had weathered centuries of immersion and decay and the violence of the depths, fell back into obscurity. It was controversial. It was inexplicable, and so it was set aside, waiting for the day when humanity would have the tools and understanding to truly comprehend what had been created in some ancient workshop. But the mystery only deepened. What was this device? Who had built it? What purpose had it served in the ancient world? These questions hung in the air like the memory of a dream upon waking, present but elusive, impossible to ignore but equally impossible to fully grasp. The mechanism sat in the museum, a puzzle waiting to be solved, a voice from the distant past speaking in the language of bronze and gears, trying to tell a story that no one yet fully understood. The artifact seemed to ask silent questions of everyone who looked upon it. What did you think you knew about the ancient world? How many things have been lost to time and ocean? What other wonders might be sleeping beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered? The story of this remarkable object was only beginning, and the full implications of its existence would take more than a century to be understood. Imagine for a moment the experience of those early explorers of the mechanism, turning it over in their hands, tracing the intricate gears with their fingers, trying to understand the purpose of each wheel within the larger system. The bronze was dark and heavy, still bearing the marks of its time in the sea, salt-etched, corroded in places, yet somehow preserving within itself the precision of its original construction. Each gear, even damaged by 2 millennia underwater, suggested the hand of a master craftsman, someone who understood mathematics and mechanics at a level that seemed almost incomprehensible for the ancient world. The thought would have been troubling to many scholars. If such sophistication existed in ancient times, what else might have been lost? What knowledge had vanished with the fall of civilizations? What understanding had the ancients possessed that humanity had to rediscover centuries or millennia later? The dive at Antikythera became legendary in archaeological circles, one of the most significant discoveries in the field of ancient history. Dimitrios Kondos and his crew, those unnamed men working with simple equipment and extraordinary courage, had opened a doorway to a completely different understanding of the past. The shipwreck itself would eventually be dated to around 70 to 60 BCE, a vessel carrying cargo from the wealthy cities of Asia Minor. It had been travelling presumably toward Rome or another major Mediterranean port when it encountered whatever disaster sent it to the bottom. Whether it was a storm, a collision, or some other calamity, the ship went down with its precious cargo, sinking into depths that would keep it hidden until those sponge divers stumbled upon it 2,000 years later. The recovery process itself speaks to the dedication of these ancient mariners who risked their lives in the service of discovery. Each dive was a small act of faith that the body would cooperate, that the equipment would hold, that the surface would still be there when they needed it. The work was dangerous. Divers in that era often suffered from what would later be understood as decompression sickness, the mysterious affliction that could strike them down with sudden, violent illness, sometimes death. And yet they continued, bringing up treasure after treasure, each item carefully recorded and preserved, each one a testament to the sophistication and artistry of the ancient Mediterranean world. The news of the discovery spread through Greece and beyond, reaching universities and museums across Europe. Scholars arrived to examine the finds, to catalogue them, to speculate about their significance. But even as they marvelled at the bronze statues and the marble sculptures, even as they examined the pottery and the coins, the corroded lump of bronze and wood remained largely overlooked. It was not beautiful. It was not complete. It did not fit easily into the categories of objects that archaeologists and museum curators understood. And so it waited, patient and mysterious, until that moment when it would finally crack open and reveal its secrets. In that moment of cracking, in that sudden exposure of gears and wheels to light for the first time in 2,000 years, something fundamental shifted. The story of human civilization would need to be rewritten. The assumption that ancient peoples were primitive, that technology advanced in a steady progression from simple tools to complex machines, that the ancients possessed nothing like the mechanical sophistication of later ages, all of this would need to be questioned. And the questions that arose would only grow more profound as the decades passed, and technology advanced enough to truly understand what this remarkable mechanism was, and how it worked, and what its existence meant for our understanding of the ancient world and the capabilities of human intelligence across the ages. The mechanism now belonged to history, but history had not yet fully understood what it had been given. It would take decades of careful study, centuries of accumulated knowledge in archaeology and engineering, and finally the advent of modern technology like CT scanning and X-ray analysis, before the world would begin to truly comprehend what those ancient craftsmen had created. But the discovery itself, that moment when Elias Stadiatis surfaced in panic, that moment when the lump cracked open in the museum, that moment when the gears became visible, these were the seeds from which grew an entirely new understanding of the past. And even now, as we contemplate this remarkable object, we find ourselves back at the beginning of that discovery, wondering at the ingenuity of ancient minds and the mysteries that the sea had kept hidden for so very long. To understand the mechanism, we must first understand the world that created it, the ancient Mediterranean, a realm of sophisticated trade networks and remarkable intellectual achievement, a world far more advanced and interconnected than many people today might imagine. Picture the ancient world, sailing ships carving routes across the wine-dark sea, carrying cargo between the great cities of the eastern Mediterranean. These were not primitive vessels, but carefully designed ships built by craftsmen who understood the principles of hydrodynamics and naval architecture through generations of accumulated knowledge. The routes themselves represented centuries of exploration and commerce, established pathways of trade that connected Phoenician merchants with Greek traders, Egyptian vessels with Roman merchantmen, networks of commerce and culture that spanned thousands of miles and bound together peoples who would never meet face to face. In the evenings, imagine the traders and merchants meeting in the ports, exchanging not just goods but knowledge, information about trade routes, about the locations of resources, about the demand for various commodities. They shared stories and information, building a collective knowledge of the Mediterranean world. The sailing ships that carried cargo also carried people, scholars, merchants, artists, craftsmen, all of them moving through the world, bringing knowledge with them, establishing connections that would endure even after individual traders had died or retired. The ship that carried the mechanism to the bottom of the sea was itself a testament to this sophisticated world. It dated to around 70 to 60 BCE, making it a vessel of the late Hellenistic period, when the great age of Greek independence was giving way to Roman dominance. The ship was travelling from Asia Minor, from the wealthy cities of the eastern Mediterranean coast, when disaster struck. Whether it was a violent storm, a sudden collision with rocks in the darkness, or some other calamity, the vessel sank, carrying with it precious cargo destined for Rome or one of the great Mediterranean ports. The ship went down in waters that would keep it hidden from human eyes for 2,000 years. But what was on that ship? Beyond the bronze and marble statues, works of art of exquisite beauty, there were many other treasures. Glass objects, delicate and precious, vessels that would have been expensive luxuries in the ancient world, pottery from across the Mediterranean, amphorae that had contained wine, grain, oil, the commodities that flowed through the trade networks, coins from Pergamon and Ephesus, great cities of Asia Minor, bearing the images of rulers and deities. These artifacts speak to the sophistication of ancient Mediterranean trade. The ship was carrying not utilitarian goods but luxury items, works of art, precious materials. This was the cargo of a wealthy merchant or perhaps of officials engaged in important state business. The very composition of the cargo suggests a world of considerable refinement and aesthetic appreciation. The ancient world had much that modern people might not expect. The cities of the Mediterranean in the Hellenistic period, the centuries following the conquests of Alexander the Great, were centres of remarkable intellectual and artistic achievement that would not be surpassed for many centuries. Alexandria, founded by Alexander himself on the coast of Egypt, was becoming the greatest library and research centre of the ancient world, drawing scholars from across the known world. It was a place where mathematicians and geometricians, astronomers and engineers, physicians and philosophers gathered to share knowledge and pursue their inquiries. The library contained hundreds of thousands of scrolls, all the accumulated knowledge of the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds. It was a light against ignorance, a beacon of learning in a world that was still mostly dark. Pergamon, on the coast of Asia Minor, was another great centre of learning and culture, with its own library and research institutions that rivaled Alexandria. Athens, though past its political dominance as a city-state, in a world now organised around the empires of Alexander's successors, remained a beacon of philosophical and intellectual achievement. The Greek world was not primitive or technologically backward. It was a realm where mathematics had advanced to remarkable heights, where the works of Euclid were available and studied, where geometry was understood at a level that would not be surpassed until the Renaissance. It was a world where astronomy was practiced as a serious science, based on observation and mathematical modelling. It was a world where mechanical engineering had developed sophisticated techniques, and where craftsmen understood how to work with bronze, stone, wood, and other materials with precision and skill. The ancients observed the heavens with a dedication that is hard for modern people to comprehend. Imagine it, night after night, year after year, lying on a rooftop or climbing to a high place, looking up at the sky without the interference of electric lights, without pollution, without the glow that modern civilization creates. The stars were brilliant, thousands of them visible to the naked eye, clear and bright in the darkness. The patterns they made were unchanging, reliable, eternal, or so it seemed. And yet within that apparent constancy, there were mysteries. There were objects that moved. There were events that happened only at certain times. Without telescopes, without complex instruments, without the electronic devices that modern astronomers take for granted, ancient astronomers looked up at the night sky and began to understand its patterns. They recognized that the sun traced a path through the stars, the ecliptic they would call it. They observed that the moon went through cycles of waxing and waning, growing from invisibility to fullness and back again, a cycle that took about 30 days. They noticed that the planets moved in ways that were different from the stars. Mars, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, each with its own peculiar motion, advancing through the constellations, sometimes moving backward, sometimes stationary. They developed mathematical models to explain these motions, geometric diagrams that represented the orbits and patterns. The greatest astronomers of the ancient world, figures like Hipparchus of Nicaea, who lived about a century before the mechanism was built, created detailed catalogues of the stars and developed sophisticated models of celestial mechanics. Hipparchus observed and calculated and theorized. He developed the concept of epicycles, circles moving within circles, as a way to explain the apparent retrograde motion of the planets. He created a star catalogue that contained the positions of more than 800 stars. He worked with trigonometry, though the subject had not yet been formally systematized. His work represented the highest level of astronomical science of his era, and they understood something profound about eclipses. They understood that eclipses followed patterns, that they could be predicted if one understood the mathematics of the heavens. There was a pattern called the Saros cycle, a period of approximately 18 years and 11 days after which eclipses repeated themselves. An astronomer who understood this pattern could predict when and where an eclipse would occur. The person most directly associated with the kind of astronomical knowledge embodied in the mechanism was likely Hipparchus of Nicaea, one of the greatest astronomers of the ancient world. Hipparchus lived in the 2nd century before the Christian era, and he made observations and developed theories that would not be surpassed for more than 1,000 years. His work stood at the peak of ancient astronomical science. He created a detailed star catalogue listing the positions of more than 800 stars, work that represented an extraordinary commitment to observation and mathematical precision. He developed a theory of the precession of the equinoxes, understanding that the positions of the stars shifted over time, a discovery of profound significance. He worked with trigonometry in ways that demonstrated mathematical sophistication at the highest level, developing tables and ratios that allowed complex calculations. And he would have understood the Saros cycle, the pattern by which eclipses repeat themselves in a cycle of approximately 18 years and 11 days. This understanding is the key to what the mechanism seems designed to calculate. An engineer working with astronomical data and mathematical principles derived from Hipparchus and other great astronomers of the ancient world could have created a device that embodied this knowledge, transforming abstract mathematical relationships into mechanical motion. The mechanism, in a sense, was the physical embodiment of Hipparchus's theoretical work, the practical application of his scientific discoveries. It was a monument to knowledge, a tool for understanding the cosmos, a bridge between the abstract world of mathematics and the concrete world of gears and bronze. Rhodes, the island in the eastern Mediterranean, became a great centre of astronomical learning and mechanical engineering. It was here that some of the greatest minds of the Hellenistic world gathered, drawn by the resources, the tradition, the intellectual ferment of the place. It was a place where practical knowledge and theoretical mathematics came together in productive ways, where craftsmen worked alongside mathematicians and astronomers, discussing problems and solutions, sharing insights and discoveries. The island had a tradition of engineering and invention stretching back centuries. It was home to famous inventors and engineers whose names have echoed through the centuries, figures like Ceres, who built the Colossus, one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was the kind of place where someone might commission the creation of a sophisticated mechanical device, where the necessary knowledge and skill to create such a device could be brought together. Here, in this particular place, at this particular time in history, the knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, the skill of bronze working and mechanical engineering, and the desire to understand the cosmos converged in a single, remarkable achievement. Here was where the mechanism was likely created, though we cannot be certain, as it was lost for 2,000 years and its creator's name was never recorded. But Rhodes seems the most likely location, the most plausible workshop, the place where all the necessary elements existed in one place. Imagine for a moment the workshop where the mechanism was created. It might have been in Rhodes, or Alexandria, or Pergamon, in one of the great centres of learning and engineering in the Mediterranean world. Picture the ancient craftsman who designed it, his mind working with the abstract language of mathematics, understanding gears and ratios, understanding the principles of mechanical advantage and how the motion of one wheel could be translated into the motion of another. He would have been educated, trained in geometry and mathematics, perhaps having studied in Alexandria or Pergamon, or one of the great centres of learning. He might have been close to the astronomers and mathematicians of his time, understanding their work and their needs. Picture him working with bronze, the metal of choice for precision work in the ancient world, chosen for its durability and its ability to hold fine details. He would begin with models, perhaps carved from wood or bone, working out the relationships between the gears, calculating the number of teeth each gear should have, determining the exact ratios that would translate the input motion into the desired output motions. Mathematics would guide each step. Then came the actual construction, casting the wheels in bronze, a process requiring skill and temperature control, careful measurement of ingredients, pouring molten metal into molds and allowing it to cool slowly and evenly. Once cast, the wheels would need to be shaped and refined, smoothed and adjusted. The teeth would need to be cut with precision tools, chisels and files driven by hand and muscle, guided by geometry and mathematical calculation. Each tooth would need to be cut carefully, with each one being essentially identical to its neighbours. Some wheels had teeth less than a millimetre in height and width, work of extraordinary precision that required patience, skill, and an almost meditative focus on the task at hand. Assembling and reassembling the components, testing and adjusting, understanding how one wheel interacted with another, ensuring that the ratios were correct, that the mechanism would produce the expected outputs when the input was turned. The work would have been meticulous, meditative in a way, each component needing to fit perfectly with its neighbours. The craftsman would have spent months, perhaps years, on the work. The historical sources suggest that creating a mechanism of this complexity might have taken half a lifetime. His hands would have become calloused and scarred from the work. His eyes would have strained in the light of oil lamps, trying to make cuts of precision that modern machine tools would find challenging. He would have been surrounded by the dust of bronze shavings and stone, the smell of metal and oil and hard work. The very existence of the mechanism tells us something profound about the ancient world. It tells us that someone, some patron, some intellectual, some state official, believed that this kind of device was worth creating. It was expensive to make, requiring months or years of work from a master craftsman, requiring extensive material in bronze and other materials, requiring knowledge that had to be carefully cultivated and preserved. It was not a toy or a novelty, not something created for entertainment or display, though it may have been impressive to see and to use. It was a serious, sophisticated piece of equipment designed to do serious work, to calculate, to predict, to embody in physical form the abstract mathematical relationships that governed the heavens. The patron who commissioned it must have believed deeply in the value of being able to predict celestial events, of having a mathematical and mechanical tool for understanding the heavens. Perhaps it was used by priests to ensure that predictions of eclipses could be made accurate and confirmed, giving confidence in religious authority and understanding. Perhaps it was used by mathematicians and astronomers, a physical embodiment of their theoretical understanding, a way to test and verify their models. Perhaps it was kept in a library or a temple, a treasure of an institution devoted to knowledge, a symbol of human capability to understand the cosmos. The mechanism might have been used for practical purposes, calculating the dates of ancient festivals, predicting eclipses, maintaining calendars, but it also had symbolic importance. It was a declaration that humans could understand the heavens, could model them mathematically, could build devices that replicated their motions. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe to the Calm Archive and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I always check the comments and it's fascinating to see people from all over the world tuning in at different times. Some listening in the evening, some late at night, some in the early morning hours before their day begins. Anyway, back to the mechanism and the world that created it. And then it was lost. Perhaps the patron died and the mechanism was packed away as part of some collection of valuables, to be transported and perhaps sold or gifted to another collector. Perhaps it was intended as a gift to another great city or another ruler or patron, a demonstration of the knowledge and skill of its creators. Perhaps it was being transported as part of a cargo of luxury goods and cultural treasures, the kind of precious items that wealthy people in the ancient world collected and traded. Whatever the reason, it found itself on a ship heading through the Mediterranean, a luxury cargo vessel bound perhaps for Rome or Alexandria, or another great port. The ship carried marble statues and bronze sculptures, glass and pottery, the accumulated riches of the ancient world. And somewhere in that cargo, carefully packed perhaps, or simply stowed with other items, was the mechanism. The voyage would have begun with good omens, with careful preparation, with the captain and crew taking all the precautions that their experience and knowledge suggested. The Mediterranean was well travelled, and there were established routes, preferred times to sail, understood dangers. But the sea was not tamed, and disaster could strike without warning. Whether it was a storm, the violent kind that can come suddenly in autumn, or whether it was collision with rocks in darkness, whether it was some other calamity, the ship encountered catastrophe. It went down in the waters off Antikythera, the mechanism sinking with it, falling through the water in darkness, coming to rest on the seafloor where it would remain undisturbed for 2 millennia, waiting silently, patiently, for the day when a diver named Elias Sterdiatis would stumble upon the wreck and begin the long process of bringing its secrets back to light. And when it finally emerged from the sea, corroded and damaged and transformed by time, it would speak across the centuries, telling a story that no one had expected to hear. The ancient Mediterranean was a world of greater sophistication and technological achievement than many people today might imagine. It was a world where mathematics had reached high levels of development, where the works of Euclid were written and studied, where geometry was understood at levels that would not be equalled for centuries. It was a world where astronomy was practiced as a serious science, where craftsmen and artisans achieved precision that seems remarkable even by modern standards. The mechanism exists as testimony to this sophistication, evidence that somewhere, sometime in the last century before the Christian era, ancient minds had conceived of and created something that would challenge our understanding of human capability for centuries to come. A mind had to imagine such a thing, a hand had to build it, a patron had to believe it was worth the effort and expense. All of these elements had to converge at a single moment in history to produce something extraordinary. And the irony is profound. This device, created with such care and precision, designed to reveal the secrets of celestial mechanics and predict the movements of the heavens, designed to embody in physical form the abstract mathematical relationships that governed the cosmos, ended up revealing a different kind of secret. The secret that the history of human knowledge and achievement is far more complex, far more sophisticated, far more mysterious than we often acknowledge. What we thought we knew about the past had to be revised. What we assumed about human capability had to be reconsidered, and what the mechanism would eventually reveal, when modern technology finally allowed us to see inside it, would be even more remarkable than anyone in 1902 could have imagined. When the Antikythera Mechanism was finally examined and understood, a process that would take decades and eventually require technologies that would not exist until the late 20th century, the world learned exactly how remarkable it truly was. The device was not a simple tool, but an extraordinarily complex astronomical calculator, containing approximately 37 interlocking bronze gears of various sizes and designs working in concert. Some gears were small, no more than a few centimeters in diameter, delicate and precisely cut. Others were larger, dominating the mechanism, serving as drivers for smaller gears or displaying information. The gears were arranged in a complex three-dimensional system that transformed a single input, the rotation of a hand crank that would have protruded from the side of the device, into multiple synchronized outputs that tracked different astronomical phenomena occurring simultaneously. Think about what this means. As you turned the crank once, the mechanism would move all of its hands and indicators in coordinated fashion, each one advancing according to its own precise mathematical ratio. The beauty and elegance of such a system is profound. One input produces many outputs. One rotational motion is translated into multiple different motions, each moving at its own speed according to the ratio of gears. This requires a deep understanding of mechanics and mathematics, an almost intuitive grasp of how gears interact, and how their ratios affect the relationship between input and output. The front face of the mechanism displayed a dial showing the zodiac and the Egyptian calendar, the two most important calendrical systems of the ancient Mediterranean world. Imagine turning the hand crank. As the gears turned within the bronze case, moving with the precision of mathematics itself, the hands on the front dial would move, indicating the date in the Egyptian calendar and the position of the sun and other celestial objects within the zodiac. The Egyptian calendar was the civil calendar of the ancient world, divided into 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 additional intercalary days, creating a year of 365 days. Understanding it was essential for practical timekeeping, for knowing when to conduct business, when to plant crops, when to prepare for the annual flooding of the Nile. Priests used the calendar for religious purposes, knowing when festivals and ceremonies should occur. But the mechanism was designed to do far more than merely display the date. As the input gear turned, slowly or quickly depending on how fast you rotated the crank, it would cause other gears to rotate at different speeds, according to precise mathematical ratios. Each gear pair would have a particular ratio of teeth. Perhaps one gear had 60 teeth and its partner had 40, creating a 3-to-2 ratio. Another pair might have a more complex ratio, creating more subtle relationships. Each geared system would be rotating at a different speed, each one representing a different astronomical phenomenon, each one precisely calibrated to reflect the actual motions of the heavens. The mathematics encoded in the mechanism would transform the regular, constant motion of the crank into the irregular, complex patterns of the stars and planets. On the back of the mechanism were more dials, a complex arrangement of circles and concentric rings, displaying several astronomical cycles simultaneously. It is this backside of the mechanism that demonstrates the true sophistication of the design, for here the device goes beyond simple timekeeping into the realm of prediction and calculation. One dial showed the metonic cycle, a 19-year cycle that represents a profound relationship between lunar and solar years. The lunar year, based on the cycles of the moon as it waxes and wanes in its predictable pattern, is approximately 11 days shorter than the solar year, based on the Earth's position relative to the Sun through the seasons. This creates a constant tension between the two calendars. They are never perfectly in sync, always drifting relative to one another. But every 19 years, something remarkable happens. The lunar and solar calendars realign. The drift that accumulated over 19 years combines in such a way that the lunar and solar cycles meet again, and the pattern can repeat. This pattern was known to ancient astronomers, who discovered it through careful observation and calculation. They named it the metonic cycle, after the astronomer Meton who popularized it, though it was likely known even earlier. The mechanism incorporated this understanding, with gears arranged in such a way that turning the crank would advance the metonic dial at the correct rate, displaying where in the 19-year cycle the current date fell. The user could look at the dial and know immediately whether the lunar and solar calendars were in alignment or how far apart they were. This information was crucial for determining the dates of religious festivals and other important events that were supposed to occur at specific times in the lunisolar calendar. But there was something even more extraordinary built into the mechanism, the Saros cycle. This was a period of approximately 18 years and 11 days, after which eclipses repeated in the same pattern. Imagine the sky darkening unexpectedly as the moon passed in front of the sun, or as the Earth's shadow fell upon the moon. These events seem to occur unpredictably, almost mysteriously. But the ancient astronomers had discovered something profound. There was a pattern to the eclipses. If an eclipse occurred on a particular date, with the sun and moon in a particular configuration, then 18 years and 11 days later, an eclipse would occur again in nearly the same configuration. The same period would repeat, and then again 18 years and 11 days later. This predictable cycle was called the Saros, and it was the key to understanding and predicting eclipses. This pattern is the foundation of eclipse prediction, a pattern that the ancient astronomers understood through careful observation and mathematical analysis, and that the mechanism was designed to calculate and display. Another dial on the back showed this cycle, allowing the user to predict when eclipses would occur, whether they would be visible from a particular location, and whether they would be lunar or solar eclipses. The mechanism could answer questions that would have seemed almost magical to most people in the ancient world. When will the next eclipse occur? Will I live to see it? Can it be predicted, or is it an act of the gods? The mechanism provided answers through the language of mathematics and mechanics. And there was one more dial, perhaps the most poignant, the most human of all the mechanism's functions. This dial displayed the Olympiad cycle, the 4-year cycle between the ancient Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were held every 4 years in Olympia, and the years were counted in Olympiads, periods between the Games. Knowing when the Olympics would occur was important for practical reasons related to travel and trade, but it also had deep cultural significance. The mechanism would show when the next Olympic Games would be held, making it a tool not just of astronomical science, but of practical daily life in the ancient Mediterranean world. The genius of the mechanism lay in the precise arrangement of the gears and the precise mathematical ratios between them. Each gear had to have exactly the right number of teeth. No approximations possible, no rounding permitted. The gears had to mesh together perfectly, with proper spacing and alignment. The input rotation, the hand turning the crank, had to be translated through a series of intermediate gears into multiple outputs that represented different astronomical cycles, each one moving at its own rate, each one expressing a different truth about the cosmos. This required knowledge of differential gearing, the sophisticated understanding that gears could be arranged so that a single input could produce multiple different outputs, each rotating at a different speed according to a precise mathematical ratio. One input becomes many outputs, one motion becomes many motions, the mechanical translation of mathematics into physical reality. Differential gearing is not a simple concept. It requires understanding how gears interact, how the speed of rotation can be changed by different gear ratios, and how multiple gears can work together to produce complex outputs from a simple input. This understanding was so advanced that differential gearing would not be reinvented in Europe until the 16th century, more than 1,500 years after the Antikythera mechanism was built. Medieval and Renaissance engineers would have found it difficult to conceive of such a device, let alone build one, yet the ancient craftsmen who created the mechanism understood these principles and applied them with remarkable precision. Each tooth on each gear was essentially hand-cut, carved one by one. The precision required was extraordinary. Some of the gears had more than 200 teeth, and each tooth had to be essentially identical to its neighbours. The cuts had to be made at the correct angles, with the correct depth and spacing. A single misplaced tooth could throw off the entire calculation. A small error in the spacing of the teeth would compound through multiple gears, resulting in significant errors in the outputs. The craftsman would have had to maintain absolute focus and precision throughout the entire construction process. There could be no shortcuts, no approximations. Every measurement had to be exact, or the mechanism simply would not work. The mechanism was not complete. Even after 2,000 years in the sea, enough remained to allow archaeologists and engineers to understand how it worked. But some parts were missing, broken, corroded beyond recovery. Modern analysts have used several techniques to reconstruct what the complete mechanism probably looked like. X-ray photography and CT scanning have revealed the internal structure of the device, showing the arrangements of gears that would have been hidden even when the mechanism was new and intact. These modern technologies have allowed investigators to understand not just the external structure, but the hidden internal workings that made the device function. The CT scanning revealed something even more remarkable: inscriptions. The craftsmen who created the mechanism had included text, instructions perhaps, or explanations of what the device did and how to use it. These inscriptions, tiny and precise, sometimes barely a millimetre in height, were carved directly onto the mechanism itself, carefully placed where they would be visible to someone using the device. They have been partially revealed by the modern scanning technology, providing insight into the purpose and operation of the device from the ancient creator's own hand. The inscriptions speak of astronomical cycles and calculations, confirming that the mechanism was indeed designed as an astronomical calculator, not as something else. They provide names of months and references to the zodiac and other astronomical concepts. Some inscriptions appear to be explanatory, telling the user how to interpret the dials, how to read the positions of the indicators. Reading these ancient inscriptions, one can almost imagine the craftsman at work, perhaps in a workshop in Rhodes or Alexandria, carving these tiny words with the same painstaking care he devoted to the gears themselves. Each letter had to be carefully formed, each word perfectly placed. Perhaps he was documenting his work, wanting to ensure that future generations would understand what he had created. Perhaps he was explaining the mechanism to someone who would eventually use it, wanting to ensure that they understood its purpose and function. Perhaps he was creating something for a patron who wanted to understand the device and its workings. Whatever the reason, the inscriptions represent a direct voice from the ancient past, a craftsman communicating across 2,000 years about his creation. The sensitivity and precision of the mechanism is almost impossible to overstate. Some of the gears had teeth that were less than 1 millimetre apart, gaps that are difficult to see without magnification. To cut such small teeth with hand tools, using chisels and files driven by muscle power alone, to maintain absolute consistency across 200 or more teeth on a single wheel, to ensure that the gears meshed correctly and that the rotation would be smooth and accurate despite the tiny variations that would inevitably occur. This represents a level of craftsmanship that seems almost inhuman, and yet it was done, accomplished with perfection, that would require many attempts and many adjustments. An ancient craftsman, whose name has been lost to history, spent months or years creating this device, working in a workshop with the tools and materials available to him, guided by mathematical principles and astronomical knowledge. creating something that would eventually baffle and amaze scholars for more than a century. We do not know his name, we do not know his face, we only know that he existed, and that his mind and hands created something remarkable. Imagine the rhythm of the mechanism in operation. You would place your hand on the crank, feeling the smooth bronze beneath your palm, and begin to turn it slowly. As the crank turned, the gears inside would engage, transferring motion from one wheel to the next through the careful choreography of mathematics encoded in metal. The sounds would be soft and intimate, the gentle clicking of gear teeth engaging precisely, the slight grinding as the bronze mechanism operated, sounds that would indicate whether everything was working correctly or if something had gone wrong. The hands on the dials would begin to move, one of them advancing slowly around the zodiac, another displaying the date in increments, others showing the lunar cycle advancing at its own pace, and the Saros cycle tracking the pattern of eclipses. As you turn the crank, you would watch the indicators move in real time, performing their appointed motions. The mechanism would become alive, almost as if it was breathing, as if the device itself possessed a kind of intelligence and intention. You would feel the resistance of the gears as you turn the crank, sometimes smooth and easy, sometimes catching slightly on the teeth, sometimes requiring more force. The mechanism would demand your attention, require you to turn the crank at the right speed, ask you to understand what you were doing. It was not a passive tool, but an active participant in the process of calculation, a partner in the work of understanding the heavens. The mechanism would slow you down, make you conscious of each rotation, each advance of the dials, connecting you directly to the movements of the cosmos. The ancients must have regarded this device with something approaching awe and wonder. What would it have felt like to see a mechanism so sophisticated, so precise, so obviously the product of brilliant human minds working at the peak of their capability? What would it have meant to be able to predict eclipses, to know in advance when the sun would be blotted out or when the moon would enter the Earth's shadow? In a world where eclipses were often seen as omens, as signs from the gods, as events that were mysterious and potentially catastrophic, the ability to predict them would have been extraordinary power. It would have meant understanding something about the nature of reality itself, that the universe operated according to knowable patterns, that the motions of the heavens followed mathematical principles that human beings could comprehend and use. The mechanism was not just a scientific instrument, but a profound statement about human capability and understanding. It was a demonstration of humanity's ability to understand nature itself, to wring from the mathematics of the cosmos knowledge that could be used for practical purposes. It said, without words, that the universe was not wholly mysterious, that human intelligence could penetrate its secrets, that the mind and hand working together could create devices that reveal the hidden patterns of the world. The mechanism was a monument to knowledge, a physical embodiment of intellectual achievement, a tool and a symbol all in one. And yet the mechanism was forgotten. The ship that carried it sank beneath the waves, and it was lost for 2,000 years. The knowledge of how to build such a device was lost. The craft that created it disappeared. The understanding of differential gearing that made the mechanism possible was not rediscovered until the Middle Ages, 15 centuries later. Generations came and went. Civilizations rose and fell, empires crumbled and were replaced by other empires, and the mechanism lay silent on the seafloor, its secrets hidden in darkness and pressure, protected by salt water and sediment. The knowledge that it embodied seemed to die with it, as if the ancient world had taken its sophistication with it into the darkness. When it was finally recovered, brought up by the brave divers off Antikythera, and when it was finally examined and understood, scholars initially could not believe what they were seeing. How could such a device exist in the ancient world? How could such sophisticated knowledge have been lost and then forgotten? How could humanity have gone backward, developing less sophisticated technology in the centuries following the mechanism's creation? And the questions that arise from the mechanism are the same questions we must ask today. What else have we forgotten? What other knowledge has been lost to time through shipwrecks and fires and the collapse of civilizations? What are we missing? What knowledge that our ancestors possessed have we failed to preserve? The mechanism speaks across 2,000 years, telling us through the silent language of gears and bronze that the history of human knowledge and achievement is far more mysterious, far more profound, far more fragile than we usually acknowledge. It reminds us that human beings have always been capable of remarkable things, that ancient minds were no less capable than modern ones, that brilliance and ingenuity are timeless qualities of human nature. And it reminds us that knowledge hard won and carefully preserved can still be lost, can still vanish into silence, leaving only traces behind, gears and bronze, inscriptions and mathematics that hint at the sophistication of vanished minds and vanished worlds. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps let the image of this ancient mechanism rest in your mind. The gears turning, the dials advancing, the mathematics of the cosmos made physical and tangible, and wonder at what other wonders might be hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered, waiting to speak their ancient wisdom across the centuries. For nearly 2,000 years, the mechanism lay silent in museum storage, its secrets locked away within corroded bronze, until one man decided that deciphering the ancient world's greatest mystery was worth the obsession. Derek de Solla Price was a British physicist who possessed the rare combination of scientific rigour and historical curiosity, the kind of mind that could walk equally comfortably through the corridors of the Hellenic world and the laboratories of the 20th century. He understood both the language of ancient texts and the language of modern scientific inquiry, both the historical record and the physical evidence that lay hidden beneath layers of time and corrosion. In the 1950s, when he first encountered the Antikythera Mechanism in Athens, it was still largely viewed as an archaeological oddity, interesting perhaps to museum curators and classical scholars, but fundamentally incomprehensible, a puzzle that most serious researchers had decided was beyond solving. The machine was corroded beyond immediate understanding, its internal components fused together by millennia of salt water and oxidation. The sea had done its work slowly and completely, transforming bronze into something that resembled stone more than metal, a locked box that refused to surrender its contents to casual inspection. Most scholars had moved on from it, had turned their attention to other artifacts, other mysteries that seemed more approachable. Most thought the device was too damaged, too far gone, too incomprehensibly jumbled to ever truly understand. The corrosion was too complete, the fragments too fragmented, the technology too alien to what anyone expected from the ancient world. But Price could not look away. He returned to it again and again, studying photographs, examining fragments when he could access them, consulting with colleagues, gathering every scrap of information about the mechanism that the archaeological record could provide. He spent the next 20 years, think of that, 2 full decades, studying every fragment, every gear, every scrap of bronze that had been excavated from the Mediterranean. He took photographs from countless angles in different lighting conditions, measured each tooth on every gear with calipers and precision instruments, mapped the channels and grooves where components had once moved with perfect precision, created detailed drawings and diagrams. This was not quick work. This was not the dramatic eureka moment that popular science imagines. This was slow, meditative study, the kind of patient, obsessive observation that characterized the very best scientific minds of his generation, the researchers who believed that understanding came not from hasty analysis, but from sustained attention, from knowing a subject so intimately that its secrets seemed to unfold naturally over time. He worked with X-ray technology, the most advanced imaging available at the time, holding the fragments beneath beams of radiation to see through the corrosion into the mechanism's hidden architecture. What he found was staggering. Within the mass of bronze, he discovered at least 30 gears, their teeth cut with mathematical precision, their relationships to one another following the laws of celestial motion with startling accuracy. In 1974, Price published his landmark paper, titled Gears from the Greeks, and with those 4 words, the entire historical understanding of ancient technology shifted. This was no religious artifact, no toy, no decorative puzzle. This was a machine of astronomical complexity, designed with knowledge that wouldn't be independently rediscovered in Europe for another 1,000 years. The paper electrified the scientific community, but it also raised more questions than it answered. How could the ancient Greeks have possessed such knowledge? What other lost technologies might have vanished from human memory? Price had opened a door, but the full light wouldn't stream through until decades later, when new technology would finally reveal the mechanism's deepest secrets. Price's work in those 1960s and 1970s, conducted with the technology available to him, with the patience and precision that his era demanded, formed the foundation for everything that would come later. He had proven that the mechanism was not random, not a jumble of broken parts, but a device with purpose and design. He had shown that mathematical relationships existed within it, that astronomical knowledge was encoded in the very structure of the gears. He had made it respectable to study the mechanism seriously, to treat it not as a curiosity, but as a significant technological achievement. When he published Gears from the Greeks, it was as though he had handed a torch forward into the darkness, and that light would only grow brighter in the decades to come. He did not live to see the full revelation of the mechanism's secrets. Price died in 1983, but his life's work had made everything that followed possible. His obsession with an ancient machine had become a gift to future generations of researchers, a foundation upon which they could build even greater understandings. The turn of the 21st century brought innovations that Price could scarcely have imagined. In 2005, the Antikythera Mechanism research project was established, a formal collaboration between researchers from multiple countries and disciplines, united in the determination to finally understand this ancient machine completely. The time had come for the next phase of investigation, one that would require resources, international cooperation, and access to the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, where the mechanism was kept. Mike Edmonds and Tony Freeth, two accomplished researchers from Britain with expertise spanning physics, engineering, and mathematics, led the charge into this new territory, armed with cutting-edge CT scanning technology that could see inside the mechanism without damaging it further, without even removing it from the museum or subjecting it to invasive procedures. Imagine the anticipation of those first scans, X-ray computed tomography that could slice through the corroded bronze layer by layer, building a three-dimensional image of the hidden world within. The ancient device had never been examined with such power, such precision. As the scan began and data began flooding back, what emerged on the computer screens in laboratories thousands of miles away was a revelation that seemed to confirm Price's wildest theories while introducing mysteries he had never conceived. The mechanism was far more complex than anyone had suspected. Where Price had identified 30 gears, the scans revealed more. The exact number would take years to fully determine, but the density of the machinery was breathtaking. The gears were not just any gears, but graduated gears, their varying numbers of teeth precisely calculated to represent the ratios of celestial bodies, the relationships between the moon and sun, the intricate dance of the planets as they wheeled through the ancient Greek sky. But the greatest discovery came from something unexpected: inscriptions. Thousands upon thousands of characters of ancient Greek text, pressed and engraved onto the mechanism's surface and internal plates, text that no one had known existed because the corrosion had hidden it from view. It was as if the ancient craftsman had left letters sealed in a bottle, messages from the ancient world speaking directly across the centuries. Teams of linguists and historians worked to transcribe and translate these inscriptions, painstaking work that revealed something almost miraculous. The text was instructional. It was a manual. The ancient builder, whoever he was, had literally written down how to operate the mechanism, instructions on how to set it, guidance on how to read the results. It was as if the original owner's manual had survived, etched in bronze in handwriting made by the hands of someone who lived in a world of philosophers and mathematician astronomers, a world that seems almost impossibly distant. Reading those instructions across the gulf of 2 millennia created a sensation that modern archaeologists described as profoundly moving, the feeling of genuine contact with the past, of having a direct conversation with an ancient mind. The inscription spoke of months and years, of predictions and calculations, of the positions of celestial bodies and the timing of their movements. The mechanism was no longer a silent artifact but a voice, calling out from the ancient world with perfect clarity. If you're still awake and enjoying this, consider subscribing to the Calm Archive. A like really does help more people find these videos when they can't sleep, when they're lying in the darkness searching for something to quiet their racing mind, something to guide them toward rest. Now, let's get back to the mechanism and the minds that built it. The X-ray and CT data also revealed something about the craftsmanship itself that spoke to the artistry of the builder. The gears were cut with extraordinary precision, far finer than the tools of the ancient world should have allowed. Yet there they were, evidence that someone, somewhere in the ancient Mediterranean, had found a way to achieve mechanical precision that would have been nearly impossible to replicate by hand. The teeth on each gear were carefully calibrated, designed to mesh with their neighbours with minimal friction and maximum efficiency. The spacing between the internal components was calculated with an engineer's eye, every millimetre chosen for functional purpose. This was not a device created through trial and error, through casual experimentation. This was designed by someone who understood orbital mechanics, who could do the mathematics, who possessed not just theoretical knowledge, but the practical ability to translate that knowledge into functioning machinery. The scans and studies continued year after year, and with each revelation came a deeper understanding of what the ancient mind had accomplished. The mechanism revealed itself as a kind of ancient computer, a device for calculating and predicting astronomical phenomena with accuracy that wouldn't be matched again until the Renaissance. It was mechanical AI in the truest sense, not thinking for itself, but executing complex calculations with the precision of a modern algorithm. The gears turned in ratios that matched the relationships between the celestial bodies, and in doing so they solved problems that had occupied astronomers for centuries. The beauty of this device lay in its honesty. Every relationship, every ratio was built into the very structure of the machine itself. There could be no cheating, no error hidden in calculation. If the gears turned smoothly and the mechanism produced its predicted results, then the mathematics were correct. If it failed, the failure was immediate and obvious. It was mathematics made visible, made tangible, made mechanical. The years of study transformed the mechanism from a mystery into a window onto a lost world. The researchers could now see not just what the device did, but how its creators thought, what they valued, what they believed was important enough to spend months or years constructing and perfecting. In an age before computers, before electricity, before the printing press, someone had decided that understanding the cosmos was so important, so essential to human knowledge and perhaps to religious practice, that it was worth creating this incredibly complex machine. The inscriptions on the mechanism, now finally readable through the lens of modern technology, suggested that this was not a secret device, not something hidden away in a temple vault. This was meant to be used, meant to be read, meant to be understood by the people of its age. The instructions engraved on the device assumed someone would want to operate it, would want to set it to a particular date, and observe what the mechanism predicted. This was a teaching tool, perhaps, or a demonstration of astronomical knowledge, or a device for making predictions about eclipses and other celestial events of religious significance. Whatever its purpose, the device was ultimately a testament to the power of human curiosity, to the drive to understand the cosmos that has always existed in the human heart. The ancient Greeks gazed up at the night sky just as we do, saw the same constellations, wondered about the same celestial mysteries, and one of them decided to build a machine that could answer some of those questions. That impulse, that drive to understand, survives in the device itself, preserved in bronze and gears, waiting through the centuries for curious minds to finally hear what it had always been trying to say. The moment when Edmonds and Freeth's team first published their comprehensive findings, incorporating not just Price's original insights, but the wealth of new data from the scans. The mechanism became something more than an archaeological curiosity. It became a bridge between our modern world and a world so distant it seemed almost mythical. Scientists could now point to specific gears and say with absolute certainty what each one did. Here was the gear that represented the sun's apparent motion through the zodiac. Here was the mechanism that predicted lunar phases with an accuracy that made medieval astronomical clocks look crude by comparison. Here was the calculation of the Metonic cycle, the 19-year pattern by which lunar years and solar years align, built directly into the machine's structure. The precision was staggering. Modern analysis showed that the mechanism could predict solar and lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, something that would have required sophisticated mathematical understanding and knowledge of astronomical patterns that only the most advanced ancient thinkers possessed. The inscriptions helped confirm this. Passages that researchers translated mentioned eclipse predictions explicitly, spoke of calculations for determining when the heavens would darken in the middle of the day. Imagine being an ancient sailor or merchant in the Mediterranean, living in a world where an unexpected eclipse might be interpreted as a sign of divine wrath or political upheaval, where the movements of celestial bodies seemed to contain messages from the gods themselves. If you possessed a mechanism that could tell you in advance that an eclipse would occur on a specific date, that the moon would enter a particular phase on a particular night, you would possess a kind of power. Not magical, not supernatural, but practical, valuable, and absolutely extraordinary. With such knowledge, you could make predictions that seem like prophecy, offer explanations that seem like divine insight, demonstrate command over the hidden laws of the universe in a way that ordinary people could never hope to match. You could serve kings or priests, earning respect and status and perhaps wealth through your privileged access to the cosmos's secrets. This is perhaps one reason the mechanism was built, as a tool for those who needed to understand and predict the movements of heaven, to translate the silent language of the stars into information that could guide human decisions, religious ceremonies, and political actions. The mechanism was a practical tool for those in power, but it was also something more. It was a testimony to human ambition, to the desire to pierce the veil between the earthly and the celestial, to bring the distant cosmos down into human hands in the form of bronze and gears. As the research continued into the 2000s and beyond, teams using ever more advanced imaging technology continued to extract new details from the fragments. Each ancient Greek letter that was deciphered, each previously hidden gear that was revealed through the scans, seemed to deepen the mystery even as it explained the machine. The researchers found evidence of sophisticated bronze-working techniques, evidence of mathematical sophistication that implied years of study, evidence of a workshop environment where multiple people might have collaborated on the device's creation. The mechanisms within the mechanism, the differential gears that allowed for the mathematical combination of separate motions, suggested builders who understood principles of mechanical engineering that wouldn't be formally codified in Europe for another 1,000 years. They were solving mechanical problems, inventing solutions to engineering challenges, and doing it all without computer assistance, without digital calculation, without any of the tools that modern engineers take for granted. What they had instead was intuition honed by decades of mathematical study, hands trained through countless hours of careful practice and repetition, and minds willing to spend years, perhaps a significant portion of their entire lives, perfecting a single device, knowing they might never see it duplicated, might never know if their work would be understood by others. The fascination that had gripped Derek de Solarprice in the 1950s was thus passed forward to a new generation of researchers, each building on the work of those who came before, each adding their own discoveries to the growing mountain of evidence that the ancient world had possessed knowledge and skill that seemed to contradict the conventional historical narrative. The mechanism, in revealing itself layer by layer through modern technology, was teaching modern science not just about the past, but about human capability, about the potential of the ancient mind, about what dedicated minds can accomplish when they combine rigorous mathematical understanding with exceptional mechanical skill and the determination to create something that will last, something durable enough to survive the destruction of the world it was built in, to speak across millennia to people who could scarcely imagine the ancient Mediterranean world from which it came. Those ancient craftspeople could never have imagined that their work would be examined by machines using radiation and advanced imaging, could never have dreamed that their inscriptions would be read on screens of light in places they couldn't have conceived, in a future so far distant that their entire civilization would be dust. Yet they built their device with a kind of permanence in mind, using bronze, a material that resists corrosion, engraving their instructions so deeply that they would survive the ages, suggesting that perhaps they did want their knowledge to endure, did hope that someday, someone, somewhere, would understand what they had created and why it mattered. And they were right. Their hope was not in vain. 2,000 years later, across the sea they sailed, in a world that would have seemed magical to them. Their machine is still speaking, still teaching, still revealing its secrets to those patient and curious enough to listen. In this way, the mechanism connects us to them across the vast gulf of time, a conversation frozen in bronze and gears, a conversation that continues even now. The question that haunted researchers as they studied the mechanism was not merely what it did, but who made it, and for what purpose did such a remarkable device come to exist in the ancient world. The answer required looking beyond the fragments of bronze themselves and backward into the intellectual history of ancient Greece, into the minds of the greatest thinkers and mathematicians of the Hellenistic age. The mechanism, when examined through the lens of its astronomical content, began to reveal hints of its origins, clues encoded in the very structure and ratios of its gears. One of the most compelling theories connected the mechanism to the work of Hipparchus, the greatest astronomer of the ancient world, who lived during the 2nd century before the Common Era. Hipparchus had developed a comprehensive theory of lunar motion, one that explained the apparent variations in the moon's speed and position as it moved through the sky, a theory of extraordinary sophistication that required not just careful observation, but deep mathematical understanding. When researchers examined the gears of the mechanism and calculated the ratios between them, they found the ratios that correspond to Hipparchus's lunar theory embedded within the machine's structure. The ancient builder had taken Hipparchus's mathematical descriptions of the moon's motion and translated them into the language of gears and mechanical motion, an act of translation that required genius, that required the ability to think across the boundary between abstract mathematics and physical machinery. This discovery suggested that the mechanism was built by someone who had access to Hipparchus's work, who understood it deeply enough to encode it in bronze, and who possessed the mechanical skill to make that encoding functional. But how did Hipparchus's theories travel to whoever built the mechanism? The answer likely lay in the famous school at Rhodes, an island in the Mediterranean where some of the greatest mathematical and astronomical minds of the ancient world gathered. Hipparchus himself had worked at Rhodes, or at least spent time there, and it became a centre of learning after his death, a place where his theories were studied, refined, and preserved. It was the kind of place where a student of extraordinary talent and ambition could gain access to the greatest astronomical knowledge of the age, where mathematical ideas were treated as treasures to be studied and mastered. The mechanism's creator, whoever he was, likely came from this world of Rhodian scholarship, a person trained in both mathematics and mechanics, someone who saw a bridge between the abstract and the physical, between the mathematical description of the cosmos and the mechanical modelling of it. He may have been Hipparchus himself, though most scholars consider this unlikely given the dating of the mechanism, which appears to be later than Hipparchus's lifetime. More likely, he was a student of Hipparchus's work, or a student of the students, a person who inherited the intellectual tradition and decided to take it in a new and unprecedented direction. The scholar Posidonius, who also worked at Rhodes and who lived in the late 2nd and early 1st century before the Common Era, has been proposed as a possible connection to the mechanism's creation. Posidonius was himself a towering intellectual figure, someone who made contributions across multiple fields of knowledge: physics, astronomy, geography, philosophy. He was the kind of polymath that the ancient world occasionally produced, a person whose learning stretched across disciplines, who saw connections where others saw only separate fields. He represented the kind of interdisciplinary thinking that the mechanism's creator would have needed. But whether or not Posidonius himself built the device, whether the builder walked in the same streets of Rhodes or lived in another Mediterranean city altogether, what is certain is that he represented the intellectual culture that made the mechanism's creation possible, a world where the cosmos was seen as a fundamentally mathematical phenomenon, where the movements of heavenly bodies could be understood, predicted, and represented through careful calculation and mechanical skill. It was an age of reason applied to the grandest questions, of the conviction that human intelligence could penetrate the mysteries of nature through sustained effort and careful thought. The research suggests the mechanism was built by a single master craftsman, or perhaps a small team led by one primary designer. The evidence lies in the consistency of the design, the unity of vision that the device exhibits. All the gears work together in a single, coherent system. The mathematical relationships between them follow a single logical plan. The inscriptions are written in a single hand, or at least in a style consistent enough to suggest they came from one person or one workshop. This was not a device created by committee, not something that evolved through many hands over many years. This was the vision of one person, or a very small team, brought into physical form through months or years of dedicated labour. The builder would have needed extraordinary expertise, knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, understanding of geometry and mechanical principles, the ability to work bronze with precision that few ancients could match. He would have needed access to specialised tools, a workshop equipped for fine precision work and time, lots of time, to perfect each component. These resources suggest someone of status or wealth, or more likely someone in the employ of someone of great status and wealth. Perhaps the mechanism was commissioned by a king or a wealthy merchant, someone who wanted to possess the most advanced astronomical knowledge in physical demonstrable form. Perhaps it was created for a school or a temple, a device meant to teach and impress. Whatever the context of its creation, the mechanism represented an investment of significant resources and an extraordinary commitment to a vision of knowledge as something that could be captured and contained in physical form. The workshop where the mechanism was created would have been a remarkable place. Quiet, focused, filled with the sound of careful work, the soft clinking of hammer on chisel, the scrape of file against bronze. The ancient craftsman would have spent his days, perhaps his entire working life, calculating, drawing, perfecting his designs on papyrus or wax tablets, covering page after page with mathematical calculations, geometric diagrams, sketches of gears and mechanisms. He would have worked bronze with hammer and chisel, casting gears and components through a process so careful and precise that the work would require immense concentration and absolute focus. Each gear had to be cast just right. Too much material and it would be heavy and inefficient. Too little and it would be weak. Then came the tedious work of finishing, smoothing the surfaces, carefully cutting the teeth, checking that they meshed perfectly with their neighbouring gears. He would have tested each part repeatedly, checking the fit of gear teeth against their neighbours, adjusting and readjusting until the mechanics were perfect. This was work that could not be hurried, that could not be delegated to assistants who didn't understand the overall vision. This was work that demanded everything from the craftsman: his knowledge, his skill, his patience, and his unwavering commitment to creating something that would outlast himself, something that might outlast his entire civilization. One might wonder what motivated such extraordinary effort. Why spend so much time, effort, and resources creating a device that could do nothing but predict celestial events? Events that would happen whether or not anyone possessed a machine to foretell them. The answer likely lies in the significance that eclipses and astronomical phenomena held in the ancient world. These were not merely interesting celestial events. They were seen as omens, as messages from the gods or the cosmos itself, as events that carried meaning for human affairs. A king or priest who could predict an eclipse, who could tell his people in advance that the sun would be covered in darkness on a specific day. Such a person would possess a kind of power. He could claim to command the forces of the cosmos itself, or to understand them so deeply that they held no mysteries for him. He could use such knowledge for political purposes, to consolidate power, to demonstrate superiority over rivals, or he could use such knowledge for religious purposes, to time ceremonies, to interpret divine will, to maintain the spiritual connection between the earthly realm and the celestial. The mechanism would have been a tool for those purposes, a way of bringing distant astronomical knowledge down into human hands, of making the movements of heaven serve human interests. But beyond these practical purposes, the mechanism was something more. It was also a demonstration of human capability, a testament to the power of the human mind and hands to understand and represent the natural world. It was an answer to a fundamental human question: what is the cosmos, and can we understand it? The mechanism's builder was saying, with his gears and his calculations, yes, we can understand it. We can reduce its complexity to mathematical relationships. We can represent those relationships in mechanical form. We can make predictions about its behaviour. We can, in a real sense, capture the cosmos itself within our hands. Consider what this meant in the context of ancient Greek cosmology, and the way the ancients understood the cosmos. The universe was understood as a sphere, with the earth at the centre and the celestial bodies moving in complex paths through the heavens, paths that were eternal, unchanging, perfect. The sun moved in an apparently circular path around the earth, but the actual path was more complex, more subtle than simple geometry could easily express. The sun appeared to move faster in some seasons and slower in others, spending different amounts of time in different regions of the sky. Sometimes the sun seemed larger in the sky, sometimes smaller. The moon exhibited similar complexities, and the planets, those wandering stars whose name comes from the Greek word for wanderer, exhibited even more dramatic variations in their movements. The ancient astronomers who studied these movements had spent centuries observing the patterns, recording them carefully, trying to find the mathematical relationships that underlay them, the hidden order within the apparent chaos. The greatest of these astronomers had succeeded remarkably well, developing theories that explained most of the phenomena they observed, theories that reduced complexity to elegant mathematical relationships. Hipparchus's lunar theory was one example of this success, taking observations of the moon's position and motion and translating them into a mathematical model that could predict future positions with impressive accuracy. The mechanism was a mechanical representation of these theories, a way of visualizing them, of making them tangible, of demonstrating that they were correct by translating the abstract mathematics into the concrete rotation of gears. When you turn the mechanism's input handle and watch the gears begin to move, you're seeing the cosmos in miniature, seeing a mechanical model of the heavens that turns at your hand. The gears represent the motions of the heavenly bodies, each one moving according to its own rules, but all of them connected together in a single system. As you advance the device day by day through the months and years, you can observe how the planets move relative to the Earth, how the moon phases change, how the sun moves through the zodiac, how the relationships between all these bodies unfold according to the mathematical laws that the ancient astronomers discovered. It is a demonstration of celestial mechanics, a teaching tool for those who wanted to understand the cosmos not just in theory but in practice, not just in the abstract but in the tangible. This is perhaps one of the most important purposes the mechanism served, as a tool for education, for demonstrating astronomical knowledge to students and to rulers, for making abstract theory concrete and understandable. Imagine a young scholar or a promising royal heir being shown this device for the first time, being taught how to operate it by someone who understood both the mathematics and the mechanism, watching as the ancient craftsman's encoded knowledge came to life through the rotation of gears. The learning would be multi-sensory and visceral. You would see the gears moving together in perfect coordination, hear the soft clicking and grinding of bronze on bronze as the components moved against each other, feel the resistance and smooth operation as you turn the handle, sense the mechanism's power and intelligence through your own hands and body. The abstract mathematics of astronomical theory would be transformed into something physical, something you could touch and understand directly, something your body could learn through action and movement. The mechanism would have been as advanced an educational tool as a modern computer, as powerful a demonstration of knowledge as any lecture or treatise, because it demonstrated knowledge in action, knowledge made manifest in motion and time. If you're still awake and enjoying this, I'd love it if you shared this video with someone who might need it tonight. If the Calm Archive has become part of your bedtime routine, subscribe so you never miss a new video. I upload every day, and there's always something new to drift off to. Another piece of history, another mystery from the ancient world, another chance to quiet your mind and let the wonder of human achievement guide you towards sleep. And hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now, where were we? Back to the ancient mind that conceived of this extraordinary device. The builder of the mechanism was operating within a specific intellectual and cultural context, a world where mathematics was revered not as abstract theory, but as a path to understanding the deepest reality of existence, where the cosmos was seen as fundamentally ordered and knowable and rational, where the intersection of pure theory and practical application was seen not as a contradiction but as a worthy and noble goal. He inherited centuries of accumulated Greek mathematical and astronomical tradition, knowledge built on the work of philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato, astronomers like Hipparchus, geometers like Euclid, thinkers whose names had survived not on paper but through their ideas, through the way they had shaped how the Western world thought about mathematics and the cosmos. He lived in a time when the Hellenistic world had spread Greek learning across the Mediterranean and far beyond, when libraries and schools and centres of learning existed in cities throughout the region, when the exchange of ideas was possible in ways it had never been before and in ways that would not be matched again for centuries. Teachers and scholars travelled, scrolls were copied, letters were sent across the sea carrying new ideas and refinements of old ones, and the mechanism's creator possessed something else beyond technical skill and mathematical knowledge, a creative vision, a willingness to imagine something entirely new. He was not simply copying or preserving the work of others, not merely translating ancient texts and building on existing foundations. He was taking existing knowledge and finding a radically new way to express it, a way that had never been tried before, a way that no one before him had thought to attempt. He was inventing a new technology to solve a practical problem, the problem of how to represent astronomical knowledge in a form that was both beautiful and functional, both mathematical and mechanical. He was doing what great craftspeople and thinkers have always done, taking what he learned from his predecessors and imaginatively combining it, imagining something new, something that had never existed before, and then having the skill and determination to bring that vision into reality. The mechanism represents the pinnacle of ancient mechanical engineering, but it also represents the ancient desire to understand the cosmos, to see the universe as knowable and orderly, to find the mathematical relationships that underlie physical reality. It is a bronze embodiment of the ancient Greek spirit of inquiry, of the belief that reason and careful observation could unlock the secrets of nature. Standing before the ruins of that spirit in the ancient world, knowing that knowledge like this would be nearly lost in the centuries to come, reminds us that human achievement, however brilliant, is never guaranteed to persist. The mechanism survived by accident, preserved by the sea that destroyed the ship that carried it, its bronze protected from the ravages of time and exposure by the very environment that killed everyone aboard. The knowledge that created it was not so fortunate. But for now, in these quiet hours of the night, as you lie with this story settling in your mind like sediment in still water, finding its place in your thoughts, you can know that in the ancient world, someone, an unknown craftsman whose name history did not record, whose face we will never see, looked at the cosmos with wonder and determination. They looked at the stars and the moon and the sun, at the planets that moved across the sky in their mysterious paths, and they decided that they could understand these movements. They decided that the cosmos was not mysterious and unknowable, but rational and comprehensible to the human mind, and they were right. They proved it. They built a machine that encodes their understanding, a machine that still speaks to us across 2,000 years, a machine that proves beyond any doubt that in the ancient world, genius flowered just as it does in ours, that human ingenuity and determination and creative vision could accomplish things that seem almost impossible to contemplate. The mechanism stands as a testament to that vision, to that confidence in human capability, to that unwavering belief that the cosmos could be understood and represented and shared. And that is a beautiful thing to carry with you into sleep. After the Antikythera Mechanism, something remarkable happened in history, something that we tend not to think about because our default assumption is that human progress moves always forward, always upward, always improving and advancing, that each generation builds on the last and reaches further than the last could reach. But the truth is more complicated, more melancholy, and perhaps more instructive and humbling to contemplate. For more than 1,000 years, 10 centuries, a span of time so vast that civilizations rise and fall within it, after the mechanism was built, nothing of comparable complexity and sophistication was created. The level of technological achievement that the mechanism represented was not equalled again in Europe until medieval clockmakers, working in a world that had slowly and painfully rediscovered some of the mathematical knowledge of antiquity, began to create astronomical clocks in the late medieval period, and even these, brilliant as they were, took centuries more before they began to match the sophistication and precision of the ancient device, before the technology of the medieval and Renaissance world approached the sophistication of what the ancients had achieved. This is not a story of continuous progress moving steadily forward. This is a story of decline, of loss, of knowledge that vanished from the world as if it had never been, that had to be slowly, painfully, laboriously rediscovered across the centuries by people who did not even know they were trying to recreate what had been lost. The fall of the ancient world brought with it the fall of the infrastructure that had supported high technology and sophisticated engineering. The Roman Empire, which had inherited much from the Greek world and had sustained the civilization that created the mechanism, gradually fragmented, not all at once, but slowly, region by region, as central authority weakened and local powers reasserted themselves. Libraries burned, whether through accident, fire spreading through crowded cities, or invading armies setting fires to destroy their enemies' resources, or through the deliberate actions of those who had come to see classical learning as threatening to new, religious certainties, as pagan knowledge that needed to be eliminated. The great centres of learning dispersed. Scholars fled cities under siege, taking what books they could carry. The workshops where craftspeople had once created sophisticated devices like the mechanism fell silent, not because the craftspeople forgot how to create them, but because the demand disappeared. The wealth that had supported such projects evaporated, and the young people who might have learned the trade died in wars or plague or moved away seeking safety and survival. The knowledge encoded in books and in the minds of masters who trained apprentices, that knowledge scattered like seeds blown from a plant in autumn, lost in the winds of history, forgotten as the people who carried it died without passing it on. In some cases, books were deliberately destroyed by those who saw classical learning as sinful or worthless. In other cases, they were simply not copied often enough, not preserved with sufficient care, and they crumbled to dust across the centuries, parchment cracking, ink fading, pages consumed by moisture and decay and insects that ate the ancient writing. Imagine being one of the last people in the entire world to know how to build a mechanism like the Antikythera Mechanism, to understand both the mathematics that describes the cosmos and the engineering required to translate that mathematics into bronze and gears. You would have spent years, perhaps decades, learning your craft, knowledge passed down from teacher to student in an unbroken chain stretching back through generations, each master training the next, knowledge accumulating and refining itself through the centuries. And then that chain breaks. War comes to your city or region. Plague kills your apprentice or your teacher. Economic collapse makes the workshop impossible to sustain. The old certainties and the old ways of life fall away. Your student does not come to learn from you anymore. They are conscripted into an army, or they flee the city, or they die, or they choose a different path, a safer trade, something that seems more practical than learning to build machines that predict eclipses. The workshop that your family has operated for generations closes. You die, and with you dies the knowledge that took decades to master, knowledge that no one else in the entire world now possesses. Your successors, if they survive at all, are focused on more immediate concerns, finding food, staying safe, preserving whatever fragments of civilization remain, simply trying to survive day to day. In the Islamic world, things were different, remarkably, strikingly different. As the classical world was fading in Europe, as knowledge was being scattered and lost, a remarkable flowering of learning occurred in the Islamic Golden Age, from roughly the 8th to the 14th centuries. Scholars in the Islamic world had a different relationship to the classical heritage. They preserved Greek texts, including the works of Hipparchus and other ancient astronomers and mathematicians. They translated these texts into Arabic with extraordinary care and precision, studied them deeply, expanded upon them, built on them, made contributions of their own to mathematics and astronomy and engineering. The torch of Greek learning did not entirely go out. It was carried forward by scholars working in Baghdad with its famous House of Wisdom, in Damascus, in Cairo, in Cordoba, and in other centres of Islamic learning scattered across the Mediterranean and Middle East and North Africa. These scholars understood that the knowledge of the ancients was valuable, was worth preserving, was worth translating and transmitting to new generations. If the Antikythera Mechanism had somehow survived into the Islamic world, if it had found its way into the hands of scholars there rather than lying silent on the Mediterranean seafloor, it might have been studied with great care, understood completely, and perhaps replicated or even improved upon. But it didn't. The mechanism was lost in the Mediterranean, buried in the wreckage of an ancient ship, not rediscovered until the modern era, when diving technology made it possible to explore the ancient shipwreck. The knowledge that created it was fragmented and scattered, preserved in fragments of texts translated into Arabic, but without the living tradition of craftspeople and engineers who could interpret those ancient texts and put them into practice, who could teach apprentices how to build such devices. It would take Europe nearly 1,000 years to rebuild the technological and mathematical sophistication that had created the mechanism, to reach a level of engineering achievement that could begin to approach what the ancients had accomplished. Gradually, slowly, through the long medieval period, knowledge accumulated again. Books were carefully preserved in monasteries, copied by patient monks in their scriptoriums, their fingers growing cold in unheated stone buildings as they laboured to duplicate texts that they often barely understood. The mechanical clock began to develop in the later Middle Ages, first in the High Middle Ages, initially created as a way to keep time for religious services, to ring bells at the correct hours, but eventually becoming more sophisticated, incorporating mechanical complications that tracked astronomical phenomena, the movement of the sun and moon, the positions of the planets. By the Renaissance, European mechanical engineering was approaching levels of sophistication that could begin to compete with the ancient world. Gears of extraordinary precision were being created, water clocks were being built, astronomical mechanisms were being designed. But this was not a reclaiming of lost knowledge. This was not a simple recovery of what had been forgotten. This was a slow, painful, centuries-long rediscovery, with each generation building on what they inherited from their predecessors, often not knowing that they were trying to recreate something that had been lost, trying to approach again a level of sophistication that had existed long before. The realization that knowledge could be lost, truly lost, not preserved in the historical record but simply vanishing from human memory, erased from the world as if it had never existed, is sobering and unsettling. It challenges the assumption that human progress is inevitable and permanent, that once something is known it will always be known, that the sum total of human knowledge only ever grows. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as compelling evidence that this assumption is not accurate, that this story is not how the world actually works. Here was a technology of extraordinary sophistication, created by people who understood it completely, explained in careful inscriptions written in their own hands, instructions and descriptions for using the device. And then it was lost. Completely lost. No one built one after it, or if they did, no records survive. No one even seemed to remember that it had existed, seemed to preserve any memory of this remarkable device. It sank to the bottom of the sea in the wreckage of a ship and lay there for 2,000 years, silent, forgotten, waiting in the dark depths for modern technology to come along and rediscover what ancient technology had accomplished. The question haunts us. What else might have been lost? What other devices, discoveries, techniques, or bodies of knowledge vanished from the world without leaving any trace whatsoever, without the slightest hint that they ever existed at all? Historians and archaeologists sometimes wonder about technologies that seem impossibly advanced for their time, about mysteries that suggest more sophisticated ancient knowledge than we typically give the ancients credit for. There is the Baghdad battery, terracotta jars found in Iraq, containing cylinders of copper and iron separated by an insulating material, possibly used for electroplating or some other electrochemical purpose, though their true function remains debated and unknown, a puzzle that has never been satisfactorily solved. There is Roman concrete, with a formulation that modern engineers still do not fully understand, that has lasted for 2,000 years without degrading the way modern concrete does, that seems to improve with age and exposure to seawater rather than weakening, suggesting a sophistication of material science that took centuries to match. There is Damascus steel, with its distinctive wavy pattern and exceptional hardness and flexibility, produced through techniques that were lost somewhere in history and are still being researched and debated by metallurgists trying to understand how the ancients achieved such remarkable results. These are hints and whispers of a deeper knowledge, of technologies and techniques that existed, but that we have lost the ability to replicate or even fully understand. We know they existed because the artifacts survive. We can hold them in our hands, examine them, study them, but the knowledge of how they were made, how they worked, what principles underlay their construction, what mathematical or chemical or metallurgical insights made them possible, that knowledge is gone, vanished as if it never existed. We can see the machine, but we cannot read the instruction manual. We can see the result of the engineering, but we cannot reconstruct the engineer's thinking. We know what was accomplished, but not how it was done, and that is a strange and somewhat unsettling position to be in as inheritors of that lost knowledge, seeing evidence of sophistication that we cannot fully comprehend, knowing that our ancestors understood things that we do not, that they achieved what we cannot yet replicate. The cycles of civilization are not steady upward trajectories. They are not simple stories of continuous progress and improvement. They are more like waves, rising and falling, rising again and falling again, carrying knowledge and capability up to heights that seem almost impossible, then watching as that knowledge slides back down, lost in the trough of darkness and chaos. The ancient Mediterranean world rose to remarkable heights in the classical period, created extraordinary things, achieved levels of engineering and mathematical sophistication that would not be matched again for 1,000 years, that seemed impossible to anyone living in the centuries that followed, and then it fell. Not all at once. There was no single moment when the classical world ended. It was a slow collapse, gradual, spread across centuries, with some places falling faster than others, some regions experiencing worse destruction than others, but the general trajectory was unmistakably downward, the light dimming, the knowledge scattering, the great libraries burning or slowly decaying, the workshops closing one by one, the masters dying without students to carry on their work. It is a pattern that has repeated throughout human history, that may repeat again in the future. Empires rise and reach extraordinary heights, then fall. Centers of learning flourish and become beacons of civilization, then disappear. Books are copied and preserved, transmitted from generation to generation, or they are destroyed by enemies or simply allowed to decay, their contents lost forever. Knowledge is maintained through living tradition, the master teaching the apprentice, knowledge passing from one generation to the next in an unbroken chain, or it is lost forever, forgotten as if it never existed. The Antikythera Mechanism was created in a moment of high civilization, when all the elements necessary for such an extraordinary achievement came together in one place and one time. The deep mathematical knowledge of the cosmos, the exceptional mechanical skill, the wealth and resources and stable conditions to support such a project, the desire to understand the heavens. But that moment passed. The civilization that created the mechanism transformed and eventually fell. The trade routes that connected the Mediterranean world were disrupted. The political and economic systems that had supported the creation of sophisticated devices broke down, and the mechanism itself became a ghost, a silent testimony to what had been possible, to what could be achieved when human hands and minds worked at their highest capacity, when the full weight of human intelligence and skill was directed toward a single, compelling goal. There is something poignant about this, something that touches a very human nerve and stirs something deep within us. We work so hard to build things, to create, to advance knowledge, to achieve something lasting. But we are always aware, at least on some level, that what we build might be lost. The civilizations we construct might fall. The knowledge we accumulate might scatter and be forgotten. The devices we create might end up at the bottom of the sea, waiting in the dark for someone someday to pull them up and wonder at what they represent. The ancient engineers who built the Antikythera Mechanism could not have known that their work would be lost to history, that it would vanish from human knowledge for 2,000 years, that the entire tradition they represented would be erased. But perhaps they built it anyway, with the hope and faith that it would endure, that it would speak to people in some distant future that they could not imagine. That faith was not entirely misplaced. The mechanism survived, though by accident rather than intention, preserved by the sea that both preserved it and lost it, hidden in the wreckage until the time came when humans would develop the technology to find it. And it did eventually speak to people in the future, to Derek de Solla Price in the 1950s, puzzling obsessively over its corroded fragments in a museum in Athens, to Mike Edmonds and Tony Freeth decades later, coaxing its deepest secrets from CT scans and computer analysis, reading the instructions written in ancient Greek. To all of us now, in these quiet hours of the night, wondering at what the ancients could do, what they understood, what they achieved, what they knew about the cosmos and about the power of human intelligence and skill. The mechanism survived not through preservation in living memory, not because the knowledge of how to build it was transmitted through generations of craftspeople, not because its design was recorded in texts that were continuously copied and studied. Instead, it survived through its own durability, through the properties of bronze as a material, through the protection of the sea that also destroyed the ship that carried it, through a kind of happy accident that allowed the device to rest undisturbed until modern technology caught up with ancient engineering. It is a strange kind of survival, but it is survival nonetheless, and it reminds us that what we create, what we build, what we understand, these things matter profoundly. They endure in ways we might not expect, in ways we cannot predict. They speak to people we will never meet, across gulfs of time we cannot imagine. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, if circumstances align and history does not entirely erase what came before, that conversation continues, and the wisdom, or the ingenuity, or the sheer human determination and brilliance encoded in what we build reaches forward through the centuries and touches people who come after, who stand in wonder at what was possible before, who see what we have lost and hope that someday the knowledge will be found again. If the Calm Archive has become part of your bedtime routine, I'd love it if you shared this video with someone who might need it tonight, someone who lies awake thinking about history and mysteries and the lost knowledge of the ancient world. If this helped you relax tonight, subscribe so you never miss a new video. I upload every day and there's always something new to drift off to, another piece of history, another mystery from the ancient world, another chance to quiet your mind and let the wonder of human achievement guide you towards sleep. Tell me in the comments, what ancient mystery should we explore next? What lost knowledge fascinates you most? What ancient technology would you most like to understand? What fragment of the ancient world speaks to something deep within you? Your questions and your curiosity fuel the next video, the next journey into the past. the next chance to marvel at what humanity has accomplished, at what we have lost, at what we might someday find again. In the modern era, the Antikythera Mechanism has found a kind of second life, not in its original function as a working tool for astronomical prediction, but in its capacity to inspire, to teach, and to demonstrate what the human mind and hands are capable of achieving when they work together in pursuit of understanding. Researchers and craftspeople have built working replicas of the mechanism, painstakingly recreating the ancient device based on the knowledge gained from CT scans and decades of research and analysis. These replicas are not merely historical curiosities, not static displays gathering dust in a museum. They are functional machines. You can hold them, turn them with your hands, watch the gears move with satisfying precision, observe how the celestial bodies move across the displays as the mechanism is advanced day by day through months and years, see the moon phases change, watch the sun move through the zodiac. Building these replicas has been a remarkable undertaking in itself, a project that required combining ancient knowledge with modern understanding. The engineers and craftspeople who have created them had to not only understand how the mechanism worked in theory, but also figure out how to manufacture gears with the extraordinary precision that the ancient Greeks had achieved, without the benefit of computer-aided design or computer-controlled machine tools, recreating as much as possible the methods and materials the ancients would have used. Some builders have used techniques that the ancients themselves might have recognized and approved of, casting gears in bronze using the lost wax process, filing and fitting them by hand with ancient tools and methods, testing and adjusting until the mechanism operated smoothly, with the gears meshing perfectly and the motions flowing without hesitation or friction. Others have used modern tools and technology while still trying to respect the spirit and design of the original device, using precision machine tools to verify the ancient designs, computer modeling to understand the mechanisms, but always keeping the focus on whether the result would have been recognizable to the ancient builder. But regardless of the specific tools used, the result is the same, a working replica that proves once again that the ancient design was fundamentally sound, that the mathematics encoded in it were correct and precise, that the engineering was absolutely brilliant. When you see a replica of the Antikythera mechanism in operation, advancing it through time and watching the mechanisms move with controlled precision, seeing the gears turn in their calculated ratios, you are witnessing 2,000 years of human conversation. You're watching the ancient builder's vision come alive in your hands, or at least in the hands of people who came after him, who studied his design with every modern tool available, who understood it well enough to recreate it, who have made his vision tangible and real once more. The mechanism tells us something remarkable about human capability and human nature, something that speaks to the very core of what it means to be human. It tells us that the desire to understand the cosmos is not a modern invention, not something that only emerged with the scientific revolution in Europe during the Renaissance in the 17th century. That desire has always been part of what makes us human, stretching back to the earliest humans who looked up at the night sky with wonder and tried to comprehend what they were seeing. The ancient Greeks looked at the night sky, at the apparently chaotic movements of the planets and the moon and the sun, movements that seemed to have no obvious pattern or purpose, and they wanted to understand those movements. They wanted to find the hidden patterns, to discover the mathematical relationships that underlay those patterns, and ultimately to encode that understanding in physical form, to make it tangible and real, to capture the invisible mathematics of the cosmos in bronze and gears. The Antikythera mechanism represents the pinnacle and fulfillment of that desire. A machine that makes the cosmos understandable to human perception, that brings the distant and incomprehensible movements of the heavens down into human hands, that transforms the abstract mathematics of astronomy into something that can be seen, felt, understood through the senses. The original mechanism rests today in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, preserved in climate-controlled display cases, protected from the elements, studied by researchers from around the world. It is one of the most visited artifacts in the museum, one of the most famous objects of the ancient world. Tourists and scholars come to see it, to stand before the corroded bronze fragments, to contemplate what they represent. The museum provides displays that explain the mechanism, showing images from the CT scans, displaying mathematical diagrams and inscriptions, helping visitors understand what they are looking at. For most people, it is their first encounter with this remarkable device. They come to see one of the oldest known computers, one of the most advanced mechanical devices ever created by the ancient world, a machine that challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient technology, and perhaps, if they are very attentive, if they stand there quietly and let their imagination work, they can feel the presence of the ancient craftsman who created it, a person whose name we will never know, who lived 2,000 years ago, who spent months or years creating this device, never knowing that it would survive, never knowing that it would eventually speak to people across the vast gulf of centuries. Think about that craftsman for a moment. Imagine their life. What we know from the inscriptions is that they were educated, that they understood mathematics and astronomy at a sophisticated level. They had access to the works of Hipparchus and perhaps other astronomers. They had the skill to work bronze with extraordinary precision, the knowledge of gears and mechanics, the ability to think through complex engineering problems and solve them. They likely lived in the Hellenistic world, the Mediterranean world after Alexander the Great, when Greek learning and culture had spread across regions from Egypt to Persia, when the exchange of ideas was vibrant and alive. They may have been associated with a centre of learning like Rhodes, or Alexandria, or one of the great cities of the ancient world. They may have been commissioned by a king or a wealthy merchant, or they may have been a master craftsperson working in a workshop for their own reasons, driven by an internal drive to create something extraordinary. Whatever their circumstances, their status, their name, all of which are lost to history, they created something truly remarkable. They designed a machine of unprecedented complexity, something that had never been created before and would never be duplicated for centuries after, calculated the relationships between all the gears with mathematical precision, worked the bronze with extraordinary skill honed through years of practice, and engraved instructions in their own language, in their own handwriting, as if leaving a message for the future, as if hoping that someday someone would understand what they had created. Did they know that they were creating something that would last 2,000 years? Did they have any premonition, any sense that this device would eventually be the most famous mechanism of the ancient world, that it would survive empires and the fall of civilizations, that it would be pulled from the sea and studied by people who would use instruments and technology beyond their wildest imaginings? Almost certainly not. They could not have imagined the future that awaited their creation. Not the shipwreck, not the centuries of darkness underwater, not the slow oxidation and corrosion that would conceal its secrets, not the modern discovery and the scientific investigation, not the CT scans and the computer analysis, not the replicas being built and tested by engineers from around the world, not the museum displays and the tourists and scholars coming from around the world to gaze at what they created and to marvel at what it represents. And yet they built it anyway, with care and precision and dedication, with an apparent faith that what they created would matter, would endure, would have value beyond their own lifetime. That faith speaks across the centuries with a quiet and powerful voice. That faith that the work we do matters, that quality and precision matter, that the pursuit of understanding and knowledge matter. That faith seems like a beautiful and comforting thing to contemplate as you lie in the darkness, as your mind settles and your body relaxes as the weight of the day lifts away from you. The craftsman who built the mechanism is long gone, their name forgotten, their life unknown except for what the mechanism itself tells us through the mathematics encoded in it and the inscriptions written in their hand. But their work survives. Their vision survives. Their demonstration of what is possible survives, preserved in bronze and gears. And in that survival, there is a kind of immortality. Not the immortality of fame or remembered glory, but something more enduring and real. It is a way of reaching beyond death and time to touch the people who come after, to inspire them, to teach them, to show them what can be achieved when knowledge and skill and determination come together in the pursuit of understanding. Think about the night sky. Right now, even though you may be lying indoors, even though there may be clouds or light pollution hiding the stars from view, the cosmos is moving above you, vast and ancient and continuing exactly as it has for billions of years, operating according to the same laws of physics and celestial mechanics that the ancients tried to understand. The sun is moving in its eternal path around the earth, or rather, the earth is moving in its eternal path around the sun, though the ancients understood it the other way. The moon is going through its phases according to patterns that the ancient astronomers carefully decoded and that the mechanism represents in gears. The planets are moving in their complex orbits, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes appearing to move backward, creating puzzles that the ancients had to solve through observation and mathematics. And somewhere in the ancient world, someone realized that these movements could be understood, could be calculated mathematically, could be represented in mechanical form, could be made visible and tangible. Someone built a machine to represent them, to demonstrate them, a machine that would persist for 2,000 years, that would eventually speak to us across the centuries, would tell us something about the cosmos and about ourselves. There is a profound connection there, between the ancient stargazers who looked up at the night sky and wondered what the cosmos meant, and us, lying here in the darkness, looking up at the same stars, seeing the same constellations, inheriting the same sense of wonder and curiosity that they felt. The mechanism connects us to them. It is a bridge across time, a conversation that has been continuing for 2,000 years, a dialogue between the ancient mind and the modern mind, between the craftspeople of antiquity and the scientists and engineers and dreamers of the modern world. That connection is what the Antikythera Mechanism ultimately represents. Not just a technological achievement, though it is certainly that, one of the most remarkable technological achievements of any era. Not just evidence of ancient knowledge, though it is certainly that too. But a connection between human beings across the vast gulf of time, a way of saying that what we care about matters, that what we create persists, that the desire to understand the cosmos and to share that understanding with others is a fundamental part of what makes us human, across all times and all ages. As you begin to feel the weight of sleep approaching, as your thoughts begin to slow and your body begins to relax into the softness of the mattress, as the boundary between wakefulness and sleep begins to blur, imagine the gears of the Antikythera Mechanism turning slowly, deliberately, marking the passage of time with mathematical precision. Each rotation represents days and months and years flowing forward. Each gear moves in perfect relationship to the others, each one connected to the whole, all of them working together in a harmony of motion, a synchronization of purpose. The mechanism represents order and understanding, the human ability to comprehend the cosmos, to find the hidden patterns within what appears to be chaos, to reduce complexity to clarity. It represents the achievement of human minds working at their highest capacity, trying to understand something greater than themselves, trying to touch something eternal and vast and beautiful. It represents perhaps the highest calling of the human spirit, the drive to understand, to know, to reach beyond the limitations of ordinary perception toward something transcendent. In the darkness of these early morning hours, in the quiet that settles over the world, in the peace that surrounds you now, there is something deeply comforting about contemplating such an achievement, about knowing that humans once created something so remarkable, so enduring, so perfect. It reminds us that human beings are capable of remarkable things when they work at their highest level, when they dedicate themselves fully to a vision that intelligence and dedication and craftsmanship and persistence can accomplish what seems impossible. It reminds us that the desire to understand, to know, to comprehend, to make sense of the world and the cosmos, is not a modern invention or an innovative development, but something ancient, fundamental to human nature itself, something that has always been part of what it means to be human. The mechanism continues to turn in your imagination, the gears moving silently, marking the passage of time. Think of the mechanism coming to rest, the gears slowing and then stopping, the device settling into stillness. Around it, the cosmos continues its eternal motion, the sun rising and setting, the moon waxing and waning, the planets moving in their slow paths. But for this moment, in your mind and in the darkness, the mechanism rests. You are at rest. The ancient craftsman's vision, preserved in bronze, has spoken its message across 2,000 years, and you have heard it, and in hearing it, you have made a connection to something ancient and profound and beautiful. Let yourself drift now. Let your eyes close if they have not already. Let your mind settle into the soft darkness that precedes sleep. The mechanism has done its work, marking time, teaching us about the cosmos, about ourselves, about what human beings are capable of achieving. The gears have turned, and they have brought you to this moment, this place, this threshold between wakefulness and sleep. You are held here, suspended in the quiet and the stillness, and it is enough. It is more than enough. The ancient Greeks gazed up at the stars and the cosmos gazed back at them, teaching them its patterns and movements. They built a machine to capture that knowledge, to hold it in bronze and gears, and 2,000 years later, that machine still teaches, still speaks, still brings us the knowledge of the ancients and the wonder that they felt when they contemplated the heavens. That same cosmos is above you now, even though you cannot see it. The same stars that the ancients studied are in their places. The same celestial mechanics that the mechanism represents are operating silently and precisely, turning the heavens as they have turned for billions of years. You are part of that cosmos. You are made of the same matter as the stars, governed by the same laws of nature, connected through an unbroken chain of causality to those ancient stargazers who looked up in wonder and tried to understand. And in understanding them, in contemplating what they achieved, you are connected to something timeless and eternal. Let that thought carry you now into sleep, into the gentle darkness, into rest. The mechanism has brought you here, to this place of peace, to this threshold where the day releases you and sleep receives you. The gears are still. The cosmos turns silently overhead, and you are at peace, wrapped in the warmth of blankets and the comfort of knowing that human beings once looked at the impossible task of understanding the cosmos. And they succeeded. They built a machine that would speak across centuries, and their message has reached you here, now, in the quiet and the dark. Sleep well. Dream of ancient stars and the hands that tried to capture their movements. Dream of the craftsmen who built the mechanism, creating something that would outlast empires, that would persist in darkness and in silence until the time came for it to be found and understood and wondered at once more. The mechanism rests, the cosmos turns, and you drift gently into sleep,